Hello and welcome to Twisted Britain, a podcast on true crime in Britain with a sprinkle of the weird and the macabre. And your host is me, Bob Dale, and I am, as we are still in this lockdown, recording in my spare room in the house. What I would say is it's quite nice having a view that is not just empty kegs of beer. So that's one upside. The downside is obviously the lack of availability of said kegs of beer. But we're fine. We're just getting on with it. As most of you know, the last few episodes have been recorded in the house, and it seems to be going well. I apologise to start this episode. I was not on track for getting this out last week, and instead of rushing out something that I didn't think was up to scratch, I sent out a kind of wee bonus episode, a Bob's Twisted Tales episode, and it seems to have gone down well. I've got some nice messages saying that it was good fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take week about and start releasing weekly for the foreseeable future. At least until all this nonsense is over anyway. And I'll do the normal Twisted Britain with a challenge and reply. And then the following week, I'll do a Bob's Twisted Tale, and then we'll get back on track. So we'll take a week about, which means there's still the normal 2 weeks between challenge and reply from whoever sets the challenge. But in between hand, you get a wee whatever nonsense I found on the internet that week. And I'll release that. So I hope you liked the last one, and I hope you like them going forward. If you've got any suggestions for a Bob's Twisted Tale, maybe a folklore from your local area, or something that happened that you think is a bit weird that you think I would like or other people would like, please do send it in, and I'll have a look at it, and we can always use that as a Bob's Twisted Tale. That was cool. So moving on with this week's episode, this week's Twisted Britain, I've been set a challenge by a fellow British true crime podcast, another one I'm a big fan of. You might start to see a theme here emerging. And basically, I'm asking podcasts I like to come on and talk to me. It's the only way I can get them really to talk to me is, get them to do some work, and it's fine. It's good fun though, having it lets people who listen to Twisted Britain hear about other podcasts that maybe the ones I've enjoyed, maybe you've not heard about them. But it also gives a bit of cross audience to everybody. And Spree is this week's podcast that I would like to bring to people's attention. And Theo from Spree was kind enough to send me this week's challenge. So Spree, British True Crime is the full title. And like I say, I found them a while ago, and they've got a really good back catalogue. They release fortnightly, the same as Twisted Britain does. They probably started just not long before us, maybe 6 months before we did. They've got over 65 episodes out, covering everything from supernatural, conspiracies, folklore, or obviously British crime. My favourite bit of their podcast is they always have a dumb criminal at the end of the episode. Wait, that doesn't sound right. They don't have a dumb criminal appearing on the episode. They just talk about one, kind of a bit of light to go with the darkness that is true crime. What I love also about them is the fact that while originally when we started up Twisted Britain, we were a bit reticent to be a bit all sweary on the podcast. I know, honestly, it's the beer that makes me do it. However, after listening to Spree, I relaxed a wee bit. Anyone that can name an episode, My Fanny Loved Me, will always be a friend of Twisted Britain. And yes, that is a Scratching Fanny, as talked about previously on Twisted Britain. So if you want to hear a bit of a different take on it to Nadine's one, then go back and look for episode 19 for Spree, British True Crime, and you'll hear them. Anyway, we'll come back to them in a moment. The last full episode that came out was a challenge set by Kate at Ignorance Was Bliss. She set me the challenge of weird food, strange culinary decisions, and I was a wee bit worried when I did that I'd maybe not got away with answering the challenge properly, as it was the one I'd kind of furthest strayed away from the challenge kind of so far. I've not done that many of them, and I'm pretty sure they'll get further than that, but it was a bit of a stretch anyway. But according to Kate, I got away with it, which is good. And despite the wonderful world of time zones, we managed to have a chat last week, and here it is. Well, hello, Kate. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. You're another person that I think we came across each other on our Discord feed, and have been probably meaning to do this for longer than we should have. But here we are.
Here we are.
And you are, of course, the wonderful Kate from Ignorance Was Bliss, who, if anybody hasn't listened to Kate yet, what are you doing? Go and do it now. And you can pause this and come back to us afterwards, because, yours will be much better listen anyway. For anybody who
listen, I'm like true crime adjacent, so they can sort of back and forth between.
Yeah, you can parallel along beside. I think that's fine.
There you go.
Yeah, if you like true crime, if you like Twisted Britain, you'll definitely like Ignorance Was Bliss. And you've in fact, tell us what would your tagline for your podcast be?
Oh goodness, I have a couple because that's how I don't script, and so having taglines helps me know when to stop talking. So I mean, one of them, because I don't think people hear that enough. But then also, didn't you feel better before you knew that?
Oh, okay.
And I'm sure you want to know. Because I'm a former forensic psychologist and crisis clinician, and I spent a lot of time collecting stories. And initially, my show was almost entirely true crime, and over time, I've sort of drifted away from that into just collecting whoever wants to tell me their story.
And I would say that's probably what I like most about your podcast. If I'm going to, sorry to jump in, but that's what I would say is not only do you have an understanding of the true crime and stuff like that, but I like the story aspect of it. I like the fact that you've gone, yeah, okay, just tell me a story and let's have a blether about it. I love it a lot.
Well, and I feel like if you can understand a podcaster or what it is like to have chronic anxiety, something like that, then you can understand a serial killer.
Yeah, okay. You kind of get inside the mind of a real person then.
Well, not deliberately, but it seems to happen. And, also that implies that podcasters and serial killers have a fair amount in common. Just saying.
So moving on. As I said, everybody should go and listen to your podcast, and I hope I hope everybody who does lets you know that they've had a listen. But you were very kind enough to send me a challenge for Twisted Britain, and it didn't even take me twisting your arm too much to do that, so thank you very much. And you sent us over weird food, interesting culinary options, that kind of thing, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And sadly, you mentioned Sonny Bean in your challenge, and we'd already done an episode on Sonny Bean quite a while ago now, and it would have been the perfect story to tell. So I kind of had to go off on a bit of a tangent. And
that makes when I had said Sonny Bean, it was more about saying you don't have to go to quite that level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to go to that level is quite an extreme level.
It is. And so it was just about, I think I was hungry at the time.
Fair enough.
And, that's what came to mind.
Well, what I did manage to find was, it's one of these things, and I've said it before, that the way I used to find my stories before I started doing the challenge was I'd just Google a load of different words and put UK true crime after it and see what comes up with. At least with this one, now that I'm doing the challenges, I've got a kind of directional web through the internet to try and weave. And I kind of wanted to find, my original train of thought was I wanted to find like a king or a queen or somebody royal, because the whole story about they have the food tasters and things like that. And it just kind of led me down a wee rabbit hole of poison. And I managed to find the Yorkshire Witch, who I kind of got a bit caught up in it because I was like, this is a really cool story, I want to tell it. And there was some food involved. So you have been the first person for me to go, how can I make this work for the challenge, rather than I found this story for the challenge.
And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it worked.
Good.
I mean, whenever you have oatmeal involved, it becomes weird food right away.
Yeah, exactly. And any pudding with an undisclosed poison in it, that could be anything.
It really could.
From follow-up research, kind of a bit more reading after releasing the episode, it seems to have been mercury that she was putting in the puddings. So that's a horrible way to go.
That is.
But yeah, anyway, I hope that it fulfilled the challenge for you.
think so. Well, and you chose well also because I live in Salem, Massachusetts.
Oh, yes, of course.
So, the connection to the witch thing.
Yeah, you must have a lot of witch lore around you then.
Which honestly, if anybody who's ever, heard me go off on one of these rants, which most of these are around Halloween every year, that I kind of start to lose my mind about this. We never had witches in Salem, both because they were all innocent victims and because it didn't happen here.
Yes, it was just tried.
There were 2 towns named Salem. Well, not even. Not even. There were 2 towns named Salem at the time. There was Salem Town and Salem Village. And all of the trials and all of the accusations and the presumed witchcraft itself were all in Salem Village. And the only thing that was in Salem Town is the jail, which is still here. It is now an 80s arcade, which I love.
Oh, cool.
I love. And after it was all done and the hysteria settled, those who lived in Salem Village kind of looked around at each other and went, oh, that was bad. And so they immediately changed their name to Danvers and pretend it never happened.
There's no easier way than going, it didn't happen here, than go, let's just blame the other place.
Well, yeah, and now we get we have like all these neo-pagans, we have all of the tourists, and okay, I mean, it is what it is.
Tourism helps. We're not going to say no.
Right?
I would say, picking up on your first point there, there was no witches is the thing that I went with the most here. Even telling the story of Kate Bateman, she was only ever called a witch at the end. She was only tried as a witch because they didn't really know what to do with her. She was just a nasty piece of work and was up for conning anybody. But anybody who's willing to burn words into an egg and then pop it right back up in a chicken, witch.
I love that.
I got to the end of scripting the episode and went, I didn't put the bit about the egg in. Fuck it, I'm just going to have to say it at the end.
I mean, that's one of those sentences where you put all the words together and then you stop and you look at it and you're like, I've never said this combination of words in quite this order before in my life.
Yeah, I know. I wrote it out and it's not often that I find myself laughing at what I've typed myself in front of a laptop going, that's ridiculous. Not because it was funny, just because this is a ridiculous statement, but never mind.
And that's when I say I love it, I don't mean like, hey, let's do this to chickens on the regular.
no,
thank you.
Right. We're all right. Yeah.
But just there's a certain degree of ingenuity and nefarious manipulation that happens here. Like, she was all in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that's not giving her credit, but it's just acknowledging, like, here's somebody who had no idea where the line was.
No, I admire her commitment, if nothing else.
Right.
Yeah, batshit crazy is what the first thing that sprung to mind when I was reading it out. I was like, she was a woman trying to make her way in the world, and she'd just lost, and she'd gone off the wrong track at some point.
I mean, yeah, if you want to get into the technical jargon, that's the clinical diagnosis. Batshit crazy, absolutely.
I mean, if she'd stuck with petty criminal, we'd never have had this conversation. So there, at least that's a good thing.
True. No, it's true. And there's always somebody who's going to take it too far, which makes me wonder, her story was at least partially involved saying to people, I'm doing this on behalf of some third party.
Yeah.
Right. Some mysterious other.
So
and
that means,
if she had.
Sorry, on you go.
Well, just that makes this whole thing, like, I wonder how many other people have gotten away with that.
Yeah, there's that. And the other thing that made me question was she knew how wrong it was what she was doing, because she was passing the buck almost. Although she was being Mrs. Blythe and she was being the middleman and being the money collector as well, she knew how wrong it was because she had to say it wasn't her.
Right.
So to me, there's a level of intelligence involved there, but on top of the crazy.
Well, that's the worst? Smart people that go crazy, when whatever form crazy is, whether it's depressed or, manipulative and psychotic or sociopathic or whatever. It's like, as soon as they get smart, then that means that every once in a while they act sane, and it becomes very difficult to walk that line.
Yeah. And I think that's probably an apt thing for people to think about at the moment, since we're all locked up in our houses. Let's all walk that fine line between crazy and smart, shall we?
Yeah, well, stay on the side of smart for the most part. I think would be ideal.
Dabble with crazy, but only every now and again, and make sure everybody else is safe in bed when you do it.
That okay, all right. Now I feel a little called out, but okay.
Kate, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you for playing along. That was very fun.
That was it was a good challenge. I liked it a lot. I've got 3 or 4 other people got them in to me, so I've got some cool ones coming up, and I'm going to try and get out a couple of Bob's Twisted Tale stories between episodes at the moment for extra people, so for extra listening for people. But before I let you go, who do you think I should be chasing to try and get a challenge from?
I have 2 suggestions, both of whom compared to me, live quite close to you. Okay. One is CK from Mirths and Monsters.
Yep.
His show is family friendly, but he is not. And he joined me at the True Crime Podcast Festival in Chicago last year, so I suspect he would have some ideas. And my other suggestion is Verity from Scary Stories.
Yep.
She looks very much into the, sort of psychological and sociological roots of urban legends, and I think she would have a very interesting challenge. They
are both wonderful suggestions. Thank you very much. It's one of these things about approaching people that I'm like, now I need to ask you to do me a favor. But yeah, like we said just beforehand, podcasters are an odd bunch, so I'm sure everyone will help out.
It's a good community. I mean, including the odd ones, it's a good community.
Yeah, we're all odd. That's why we're doing it.
It's true.
So thank you very much again for joining us. And I'll, say, this will be out next week. And I hope everybody enjoys it. And I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Love you. Bye. So there you are. You heard it yourself. I did get away with it. It was really good fun chat, actually. And I've been looking forward to chatting to Kate for a while. In fact, that wasn't actually the end of our chat there. We actually stayed on the phone for another, the best part, 2 hours, I would say, chatting. And what we did was we managed to record an episode of Kate's podcast, Ignorance Was Bliss. So she's turned our phone conversation into that podcast that came out yesterday. So if you get a chance and you want to hear Kate and I talking about everything from COVID, because obviously we can't get away from that at the moment, to mental health, to why the fuck I even podcast at all, my takes on research into podcasts and all that kind of stuff, and I use research in inverted commas, as you all know, then go and give it a listen. It's the most recent episode of Ignorance Was Bliss, and I had a lot of fun doing it. If you don't want to listen to that, also fine. No, not going to make you. Anyway, I hope we can get Kate back on here at some point. I'd like to do a bit more something rather than me doing a challenge for her or us just having a blether. I think it'd be cool if we can get a proper criminal minds expert involved in doing a British true crime case. And I'm sure Kate would be more than happy. She is much more of an expert than I am, after all. So anywho, we get back to this week's episode. And as I said, it was sent in by Theo from Spree, which means that Rachel can send me one another time. And that's why I like to ask podcasts with 2 hosts, because I can get 2 challenges out of them. So here is the challenge that Theo sent me.
Hello, Bob. This is Theo A. Knight, one of the co-hosts from the podcast Spree, which is, if you can tell by my accent, another British true crime podcast, which always features a dumb criminal at the end of each episode, just to lighten the mood, because true crime isn't exactly sunshine and flowers. I feel like I'm saying the obvious there. Anyway, word that I would like to challenge you for is fraud, and that can range from anything to a Ponzi scheme to identity theft. There are plenty of interesting cases out there, and I would love to hear what you come up with.
So fraud fraud is this week's challenge. And I didn't want to go too boring, actually. I didn't want to go down the route of bank fraud or internet fraud, or mainly because I want you guys to listen and maybe stick around, come back for another episode after this. So I thought I'd stay away from bank fraud. So I did as I normally do, and I sat down in front of my trusty Internet Explorer, and not the branded Internet Explorer, just the Explorer I use for the internet. And I started searching around, and I found a few things, all mainly money, so I kind of steer away from them. And then one about murder, but he ended up being caught and only charged for fraud, and it was a bit of a boring end to a story. So, steer away from that one again. And I thought, hang on a minute, I can stretch this. It is my show. So I thought, well, if you pretend to be somebody, you're a fraud, right? So I found a list of impersonators, and I don't mean the John Colshaw type of impersonators. I mean, I'm going to look for somebody that pretends to be somebody else and then fuck them over. Those kind of impersonators. Very much indeed like the wonderful John Darwin, the canoe man that I've covered before. But this time I found a list of them. And I worked my way down said list, and then I came across this wonderful case, and it was right in my time zone, my favorite time zone even, fucking ages ago. So this is the story of Mary Carleton, or Mary Stedman, or Maria Duval, or anyway, Mary. Mary was an Englishwoman born in 1642 who grew up to use quite a few different identities, mainly to marry men and defraud them. And defrauding counts the same as fraud, right? That's all right. She most famously, however, assumed the identity of a German princess just to get with another man. Now, I'm going to guess that most of you will never have heard of Mary, but yet about 300 years ago, she was not just famous in London, but around the country. She was possibly the most well-known impersonator in British crime at that time. Yet we know very little of her, other than that of the Newgate Calendar, which has been my main source for this. That and, we'll get onto it, but there is one other book that you can read into. The Newgate Calendar, however, is a pretty bloody hard read. So what I've done here is I've just told the tale of Mary. So here we are. As I said, Mary was born in August of 1642 as Mary Moders in Canterbury to a kind of unremarkable family, which is not a really fair thing to say, but you know what I mean. Her father was a fiddle maker, and she clearly didn't want to hang about Canterbury, and she wanted something more for herself. Even though it'll be clear to see as we go throughout this that Mary wasn't particularly one to believe in the sanctimony of marriage. Well, not in the same way as most of us would do anyway. I'm sure to the people that she was getting married to, she seemed really into it. That was until, of course, she just fucked off with all your stuff. She married her first husband reasonably young, and he was a journeyman shoemaker. With this man, she had 2 children, but sadly both of them died in infancy. And that marriage didn't last that long after this. She was an unhappy woman and decided to run away sometime around the 1660. And she met a man from Dover. In fact, a rather wealthy man in Dover, a wealthy surgeon. The pair married, but it wasn't long until it was uncovered that Mary was in fact still married to the shoemaker. And as such, she was arrested and tried for having 2 husbands, bigamy being illegal at that time. It actually hadn't been until 1604 when it was part of an act that was passed that bigamy became illegal at that time. However, Mary managed to escape from being found guilty due to the fact that her first husband didn't turn up to court to testify against her. She could have been jailed for it, but she got away pretty much scot-free. And as Mary seems to do, she ran away again. This time, however, she made it out of England before stopping. We think she went to Cologne, where she found another man. That seems to be the one thing that Mary was very good at, was finding men. This time, that man was a wealthy nobleman. Wealthy nobleman. And after a brief affair, the 2 of them had planned to get married. And I feel at this point, she's starting to regard men like some people would regard Pokemon. She's just got to catch them all. Of course, they're doing these plans for the wedding, and the man wouldn't get involved in the wedding plans. So the nobleman showers her in presents, very valuable presents at that, and they begin the preparations. Now, these preparations were left to Mary, and what would she need to do for these preparations? Well, she'd need loads of cash to do the planning. And what does Mary do better than catching men? She runs away. And what did she do? She ran away again. This time, however, taking with her those valuable presents and the cash. Now, we could speculate here that she did run away because she didn't want to get caught for bigamy again, or we could say she's becoming rather accomplished fraudster and just running away with all the free stuff. At this time, however, this stuff's all speculation. We don't know exactly what happened, but we do have a source for this, and that source is Mary herself. But I'll come back to that in a bit. The next we know of Mary for definite is in 1663, and she reappears this time in London, taking lodgings at an inn. Whilst in these lodgings, she would swan about telling people she was an orphaned princess. In fact, she was Princess Van Walloway from Cologne. Well, I mean, she had been there. She claimed her father was Henry Van Walloway, Lord of Holmstown, and that she'd fled her homeland, tried to escape a marriage she was being forced into. She even had with her letters from her father that contained information on her family's wealth and status, and she used these and some well-placed tears to bag her next Pokemon. Husband. So under the name Van Walloway, she met the surgeon John Carleton, who was in fact the brother-in-law of the landlord in the Exchange Tavern where she was staying. The two of them were, made for each other really, as John was also living a little bit of a lie. He was pretending to be a lord. I love it. A man pretending to be a lord to attract a princess who was actually the daughter of a fiddle maker, pretending to be a princess to attract a lord. It's a pretty fucked up love triangle of lies. John managed to convince Mary to marry him. We don't think it would have taken much convincing considering her history with wealthy men, but we'll go with John convinced her. Only a few weeks into the marriage, and John discovered her real past by the means of an anonymous letter. Now, Mary was again arrested for bigamy, or as my favourite term I found for this, hubby hopping. So the trial was set, and in the lead up to it, there were several pamphlets published satirising the fake princess and the fake lord, which I suppose is probably the 1660s version of ripping into them on Twitter. Joe Public seemed to be on her side, and her innocence was the kind of general perception. Whilst in jail before the trial, she was even visited by Samuel Pepys, MP, who was convinced of her innocence. At the trial, she presented herself as a confident woman who had been tricked into marriage by a man pretending to be a lord and a wealthy aristocrat. However, the Carletons' defence against this rested in the hands of one witness that they were bringing to trial. But as it happened the last time, the witness failed to appear, and as such, the judge dismissed the trial as hearsay, and Mary was once again free to go. After the trial, Mary wrote her own story, and that is the book I was talking about earlier. Most of so far, what we know is up to here is of Mary's own writings. So everything taken with a slight pinch of salt, I believe. So not only did she write her own story, but unbelievably, she starred in a play based on her own life titled The German Princess, which basically a satirical play making light of the frauds that she just appeared in court for. During the run of the play, she gained several male admirers, and they showered her in gifts. And returning to her true form in the mantra of "gotta catch them all," she even married one of her admirers. You'll not be surprised to hear that one night, while the man was drunk, she took all his stuff and does what Mary does, runs away again. Doesn't take too long till Mary obviously gets bored and decides, I know what I'll do. I'll concoct a fake persona and set off try to catch the next one. This time, she went to some further lengths and incorporated accomplice. She took on the role of a rich virgin heiress. Now, I think we can all agree that there's absolutely no chance that she was either of those things, rich, virgin, or heiress. Anyway, she did say she was fleeing her father, who was trying to set her up with a suitor that she didn't want to marry. There's a common theme in all of her fake setups. She was running away from a forced marriage to another man that she didn't want to be with by a man that was trying to overpower her and yada, 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 whatever. This time, however, she did have the accomplice send letters to the lodgings she was staying in, and she just handily left them around so that the landlady would see these letters and, well, the contents of them, which were, family updates and how they were getting on. And, in fact, there was that one that described her brother's demise and all the family money that would be coming her way. That rotten father of hers was still trying to make her marry a nasty man after all. and her landlady, who turned saviour, shall we say, set her up with her nephew. So Mary moved in with him and stole his money and ran away. Mary spent the following years coming up with new aliases and ripping off men all over London. And she pretty much got away with most of them, as the men she ripped off or ran out on didn't really want to admit it through embarrassment. She was tried on a few occasions over the years, and all under different names, and at one point did serve a short jail term. That is all until 1671, when she's caught stealing a silver tankard. Now, whether it was just a fucking big tankard or it was a combination of her past trials, I don't know, but she was sentenced to death at this time. There was an appeal put in, and it was and the sentence was commuted to penal transport. No laughing at penal transport, anybody. And she was sent on a ship to Port Royal in Jamaica, where she became a prostitute, which is a bit of a step down, I suppose, but, needs must. But Mary, as we know, is good at one thing. So she wasn't in Port Royal very long before she pulled off her best ever running awaying and managed to con herself onto a ship sailing back to England.
Arriving in London, it didn't take very long for her to start passing herself off as a rich heiress again. And this time she managed to bag herself a rich apothecary in Westminster. Obviously, she just stole his money and popped off.
Mary's luck, shall we say, finally ran out in 1672 when she was spotted and recognised by a prison officer from Newgate Prison, who had recognised her from the short stint in jail she'd done before being sent to Jamaica. She was arrested and taken to trial, and this time, however, due to the fact that she should be in Jamaica and was breaching the terms of her penal transportation, she was sentenced to hang. She tried everything to get off, including pleading the belly, which is the first time I've heard that term, even though we've talked about people before who claimed they were pregnant to get away with things. But yes, she pled the belly. After being examined by a team of matrons, she was found not to be carrying a child. So she was taken to be executed at Tyburn, and she told the waiting crowd that she'd been a very vain woman, and she hoped she would be forgiven by God after her death, as she did forgive her enemies after all. She was hanged on the 22nd of January, 1673, and buried in St. Martin's Churchyard. On her gravestone is written, "The German princess here, against her will lies underneath, and yet, oh strange, lies still." And that, folks, is the story of Mary Carleton. Mary Moder, Maria whatever, Mrs. Margaret whatever she decided to be that day. What we do know, she wasn't a rich virgin heiress. She wasn't anything more than a fraudster, and has become a woman famous, in fact, for marriage fraud. Well, we'll never know if she caught them all, I suppose. She made a fairly good go at it. And in fact, we don't know how much of that first part of the story is accurate, because of most of it had been remembered in her own words. I like to think that most of it probably was, because why would you make that up? Especially when you get caught for the same thing later on. But no matter what actually happened, I just thought it was a great story. And I'd like to say thanks to Theo for setting the challenge, because without the challenge, I'd have never found that story. So there you go. That is my answer to the challenge of fraud. I hope you all liked it. I hope it answered your challenge, Theo. I will try and get a chat during the week before the next episode comes out. As always, if you've liked what you hear, please do rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews are always a wonderful thing. It's lovely to see. I hope everybody is keeping really well. I hope podcasts are helping you get through your day. I know all the creators that I know are putting out extra content or trying to help people, and it's just something to get you through the days while sitting about in the garden or sitting about wherever you happen to be. So I hope everybody's keeping safe and well. And I think that's about it. If you do want to get in touch with us, you can find us on social media. If you look for Twisted Britain on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, you will find the pages. Do like those. And also, if you feel like having a blether and chatting to myself and a lovely group of people on there, there's the Twisted Britain discussion group, which I'm going to get back onto and start posting a discussion thread for every episode. I've been a bit slack on social media. I'm not very good at it, if I'm being perfectly honest. But we'll get back onto it. I don't suppose there's anything else left for me to say just now. So I'm just going to finish with thank you, love you, bye, and wash your hands. See you later.